Welcome to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nick King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox, and together we're here to explore, understand and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course. Welcome to the second part of one of the special Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. I still struggle to say that. You know the drill by now. You know the name of the podcast that I, Kate Fox, host with Nick King, where we have intermittently guests. So we've got the second part of our guest podcast with Fergus and Sonny Hallett. Our first part looked at monotropism, but then we uncovered and got into more widely the topic of autistic identity. We did this via looking at neurodivergent privilege, actually, which is where we're going to start because we didn't have time to have Sonny's take on their own neurodivergent privilege and I would say lack of across certain axes. But then we're going to talk widely about, okay, well, how do we, these neurodivergent identities are in flux. And some of the things that can help are being around and talking to other neurodivergent people. Counselling can help, mutual aid groups can help. Mentoring courses like the one Nick runs can help. Something about constructing an identity on the fly. But Sonny, coming to you first, this really hard question. So your identity is, well, in fact, it's an even worse question. Can I ask you to describe your identity, perhaps across some of the multiple axes that you multiply contain as a multiple being?
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I mean, I could be sort of kind of cheeky here and be like, well, I'm tall and I like Lego and I like looking at pictures of bugs. So those are some identities. But I think, you know, yeah, I'm half Asian and half European, and I'm trans. I have EDS, which is very common to lots of autistic people. And yeah, I mean, those are all kinds of, it's a really complicated question that you're asking, Kate, I think. And it's difficult because I think that, like Fergus, I do have quite a lot of privilege in the area of kind of like coming from sort of quite a sort of weird intellectual background, and with a family that sort of embraced weirdness in a certain way, but also in quite a normative way. So it wasn't exactly easy, but there was certain allowances for certain types of weirdness. I would say maybe not so much allowance for actually my queer identity, for example, or for really sort of weirdly exploring racial identity in the same way. So the way, I think what you're asking in a way is like this sort of intersectional, how does that intersectional thing play with privilege? And oh man, I don't know, I'll probably have to write a paper about it and it would take a really long time and then I'll be tired. It's complicated, right? Like, realizing that I was autistic gave me access to realizing that I was queer, gave me access to putting words to my feeling of gender dysphoria and transness that I didn't have words for because I met queer autistic people. I am struggling with meeting queer autistic mixed race people who lived in two countries growing up and had the history that or something more similar to the history that I've had. So I think in a way, seeing people's experiences or seeing my own experience reflected in other people is something I struggle with sometimes. I have to like almost find separate communities. So that's as close as I can get to answering that question.
That is a brilliant answer though. And that seems to have and the idea that, so certain parts of your identity can be reflected, but there is something particularly, that would be particularly empowering and reflective about maybe having all of it reflected, but actually because your identity is so multiple and specific, and there you are living in Edinburgh and it's not totally full of queer autistic people who are half Asian, half European. In fact, maybe there is one other and they don't even know. Damn it. But they'll get to know, and then you'll form a support group, and then it will grow, and it will still be quite small, but in some way empowering. And but it's the fascination of having our multiple identities reflected and connected. So I'm aware we've not spoken to Fergus yet, and Nick's not spoken yet, and this is sometimes how the guest podcasts go. Because can we just, staying with you, Sonny, ask about so you are working as a counsellor, you've trained as a counsellor, but you've also done research into counselling for autistic people. Could you say a little bit about where we are as a society around that? I mean, is there loads of really good, well thought out, well practiced counselling available and accessible to nearly all autistic people?
It's a really nice, easy question after the last one. No. Unfortunately, no, sadly there isn't. And I think that there is an increasing amount of counselling that comes with a better understanding of being neurodivergent, and that comes, that is with autistic counsellors or neurodivergent counsellors. And there's so many training courses around neurodiversity affirming therapy aimed at therapists these days, with very, very varying degrees of okayness about those courses. So yeah, it's a really weird landscape at the moment, and I think the need for therapy is huge. The demand is huge, and there's an issue with privilege here as well, right? Because accessing therapy through the NHS is really hard. Accessing private therapy is very expensive. There are some funds for people who fit various kind of minority criterias out there, but they're very limited. So yeah, I think, I work mostly with neurodivergent people and queer folks, and I'm also very aware that it is largely, besides the sort of few concession rates I can do, it's largely people who can afford to pay. That's difficult.
And actually, it hugely kind of counselling and therapy can do that necessary thing we talked about of having your identity reflected back to you, not necessarily by someone who shares all aspects of that identity, although sharing some aspects and having deep inner knowledge is useful. But so again, even that is a really, as you say, difficult thing to access, although more of it is now available. So mutual aid, I suppose, is one thing that can pick up the slack. Fergus, could you say a bit about Amaze and the mutual aid stuff that you've been involved with over the last few years?
Yeah, so Sonny and I set up Amaze, the Autistic Mutual Aid Society, Edinburgh, about 8 years ago, was it? No, less than that. When was it?
About that.
No, well, it was getting on for that. So I think we set it up after we had attended the late diagnosis group run by the local autistic charity, Autism Initiatives, which was in some ways quite helpful, but at that time it was being run by non-autistic people, and they did a lot of kind of going through checklists of ways that your life might be messed up. And they didn't do a terribly good job then of helping facilitate autistic people talking to each other, which was obviously the most useful bit of the whole thing. So we did that, and then we went to Autscape, the yearly retreat/conference run by autistic people for autistic people, for the first time in 2016. My mum, Dinah Murray, had been going since the start. And partly because she was going every year, I didn't go. It was sort of not wanting to cross the beams thing. I don't know. Plus, like, there were a couple of years where she wanted me to stay behind and look after my dad. Anyway, so we went to Autiscape and we experienced being around loads of other autistic people, and in some ways finding that it was much easier to socialize than it ever had been before. And there was a huge amount to learn from other autistic people. And it was just a fantastic experience. And we came back to Edinburgh like, we're not around autistic people anymore. We should do something about that. So we started running initially add-ons to Number 6's late diagnosis group, which we had previously attended, to sort of fill some of the obvious gaps, like talking about autistic identity and community. We'd also started participating in online autistic communities at that point. And after we'd done that once, actually, one of the people who had attended said to us, do you want to run a workshop together at University of Edinburgh? And we're like, yeah, that's a good idea. And out of that came the idea that we should probably do that like as a group of some sort, which we should probably name. And we got together some of the other people who'd attended the group that we ran, and one or two people who we knew already, and Amaze was formed. But like, Sonny, do you want to talk a bit about what we have done as Amaze, or what we did in the years when you were chair?
Yeah, I was. You've got a much better memory of the timeline than I have. Actually, I'd forgotten about the University of Edinburgh training, which was, yeah, actually that was because that was the first time we'd started running training as a group in a way, and that's something that Amaze does quite a bit now, which is sort of training for other organizations and places run by autistic people. And one of the things we try to do is always make sure that there's, it's not one autistic person running any given workshop, so we get multiple perspectives. And other things that Amaze does and has done, so that there's just sort of three strands in a way. It's training and education, which is like what I mentioned, working with organizations. It's community building, so that's sort of building community within the autistic, building an autistic community, basically giving people opportunities to meet each other, share experiences, share ideas, mutual aid. And the final one is sort of advocacy and sort of campaigning, and so being quite involved in autism politics, in Scottish politics, which certainly for the time that I was chair, I think I found that the most difficult. It was the thing that burnt me out in the end, I think, because it's wearing. It's very wearing working with a policy that is repeatedly written in a way that's about us, right, and not with us. So it's repeatedly having to remind people, hey, we're autistic people, we're in the room, these are our perspectives. We're in the room,
but why are there only two of us?
Yes, right, exactly.
Wait, where did the second one go? Shouldn't we be making sure that there are like multiple autistic people in every room that's making decisions about autistic people?
A sort of quite absurd thing we ended up doing at one point was me and KB, who's chair of Autism Rights Group Highland, running workshops for the Scottish government on their obligations to the UNCRPD, which is the UN kind of rights for disabled people. Like, the government people should know this, it's their jobs.
That just shows where we are. Sorry, Nick, go on.
I was going to sort of bring it back slightly round privilege again, because I live in, very northern England. It wouldn't take me much more than 2 hours to get to you. And I consider Scottish policy on sort of all these intersectionalities that we're talking about being autistic, about being LGBTQ+, slightly better than what we've got going on in England at the minute. And then we were having a conversation earlier, me and Kate, about America, and how it's vastly different there. And those community groups that you're talking about, that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of finding, your other autistic people where it feels easier is almost non-existent, no matter what age group that you're in. And it's it's still incredibly difficult, but also sometimes you have to sit and think about sort of the privilege that we've had and have, but also how difficult it is to work with your other intersectionalities whilst going to scream into the void of politicians.
And how burnout seems a likely possibility if you're kind of dealing with these issues while the only two autistic people in the room being routinely stigmatized and othered. Again, that comes back to certain aspects of identity might allow you to speak and have a place in the room, but flipping heck is hard once you get there. And thanks for articulating that.
Yeah, and that sort of loops back to why the community building aspect of it is so important. And that's where we started. That's where we met you, Kate, first. I think you came to the second of the groups that we ran, by which time Amaze existed. So I think we were calling it Amaze, and it was an autistic-led late identification group, we called it. And Kate was in town for the festival, I think. And somehow I came to invite you to it. I can't think how that happened. But
yeah, I think I'd said something
time.
on Facebook. It was so crucial for me at that time because there I was living in Thurskyn, North Yorkshire. There was absolutely nothing available to me there. Nothing. Still wouldn't be. But then through me saying something maybe somehow on Facebook about my diagnosis, you invited me to this group. It was during the Edinburgh Festival. Again, it's really expensive to get there. I was lucky that I was able to be there because I was doing my PhD and I had funding, and I went to your group, and my gosh, there were, you remember, there were people with sunglasses on indoors and ear defenders, and you gave out a glossary of autistic terms and talked about autistic burnout and inertia, and it was like blowing my mind.
Sim toys all round.
The what all around?
Sim toys.
Sim toys, yes. Good point, which I've still not fully, but yes, this autistic environment, this space you had created, that I still remember how it is, that was fundamental in the formation of my autistic identity, giving me a permission that was not available elsewhere. I wasn't seeing it elsewhere. And that is the situation for so many people still. And Nick, I'm aware that you've had I suppose one of the more common routes of surrounding yourself with more autistic people. You gave birth to some. So that's
One way to make some autistic people to hang around with, isn't it?
Exactly.
Read
Definitely
them.
produce them. And then also you now run training courses for young neurodivergent people. So again, you're kind of you're doing that thing of the identity reflecting back. How far would you say you are able, Nick, to do the community building aspect of things?
So in that sort of history kind of way, my background before I started Pandas properly is charity work, and it was youth work. It was young people groups, one of which actually just had their 7-year anniversary today. I shared that one for 4.5 years, and that's within my background. But also, if I think back to when I first started teaching adults, I was always given the difficult people in quote unquotes, that were difficult to teach in quote unquotes, and they were all just neurodivergent. But way back when that was when I started teaching, at best we could refer them for a dyslexia diagnosis, and that was it. And these were the people who had failed quote unquote school and were coming to do sort of like basic level GCSEs, or foundation skills. So they've always been there, and we've always had different labels for people for hundreds of years, haven't we? Some of them far more inappropriate than others. Who like some I wouldn't even say on this podcast. For just no. Maybe some of the slightly nicer labels, like being weird. I remember sitting at Christmas last year, and one one of our family friends was talking about, he's in his 70s now, and his sort of self-actualization. And he was like, we had labels for me as a child. I had the choice that I was either lazy or stupid. And I knew I wasn't lazy. So I must have been stupid. And he held that. And he held that forever. And he's probably very likely autistic and probably very likely dyslexic. And I think now that we are, not only do we have the privilege of being able to identify ourselves, we have the privilege of the internet. We have the privilege of social media. We have the privilege of being able to find each other. We have the privilege of having at least more chance of seeing ourselves reflected back in someone. Even if, you know, if you keep adding intersectionalities on, that possibly gets a little bit more difficult. But I think we're living in a time that we're benefiting from as a community very, very heavily now. And I feel like that's helping things move at a faster and greater pace, hopefully in a positive direction.
Yeah, I'm hearing the hope. I mean, that makes me almost want to think, as we begin to wrap up, we had more minutes in this one than we did in the other one that went so weirdly quickly. But I almost could we look to the future? Because I do perceive all three of you actually. Oh, and me. I almost forgot me, because it's literally in my show. I was going to say, you know, all of us here in this Zoom, on this podcast, talk, write, think about futures, neurodivergent affirming futures, I would say, in certain of the ways that we articulate things. So what do you most, I mean, all of us, like, what do you most hope for in a neurodivergent affirming future? And, or, because they might be different things, what seems to be some of the directions that our neurodivergent person future might be heading in at the moment? So just, if you could just predict the entire future and wrap it up within 5 minutes, I mean, that should be perfectly simple. Thanks, everyone. Crack on. Go back to you. So whoever wants to start first, actually.
Fergus, Sonny.
Sure. I think, you know, this isn't going to be like I might give a very different answer without the conversation we've had so far. So I'm going to think about this in terms of like community and a lot of what I've been focusing on over the last while, which is that I see a lot of autistic people who are supporting other autistic people and really, really struggling with that, because our community is struggling and because a lot of people are struggling. And I don't think that at the moment we have a mental health system that knows how to work with community and knows how to foster and support community and knows how to support individuals to support their communities. So my hope is that we can do something where we can do more to acknowledge that these communities are important. And I think some of that comes from having therapists who come from the autistic community. And this is no shade on all the neurodivergent therapists I know who were therapists first and then realized they were neurodivergent. That's really important. I don't meet enough yet other therapists who realized they were autistic first and became part of the community and then became therapists, because it's really hard to train when you have a neurodivergent diagnosis. But I think that's really important to know what community is and kind of be able to talk about that. And I sort of, something I'm really excited about is, and I thought about this when we were talking about monotropism earlier as well, is that neurodivergent people, I think by and large, a lot of us have been taught to try and deal with life and deal with community in a neurotypical way. So we all think we're failing, right? Like we all went through periods of time quite often where we thought we were getting it wrong. A lot of us didn't have the opportunity to work with other neurodivergent people to find the strategies and the ways of being that work for us. So a future where we can support each other to reclaim our weird ways of being feels really, really important. So that's what I hope for.
Yeah. I think it's important to say that our society is failing a lot of people in a lot of ways, and it's all connected. Like the ways that this society doesn't work for autistic people are mostly ways that it doesn't really work very well for most people. So I'm hoping that community will be more of a thing for everybody in the future, because really we've had such a shift away from that in the last, I don't know, over my lifetime and going back before then. So, 50 odd years of kind of atomizing, the church is no longer the community hub that it once was, and it's just never been replaced. We just don't have community gathering. Most people don't know their neighbors, let alone other people who are like themselves. The internet has in some ways been magnificent for connecting up people with shared experiences. But obviously it's also been disastrous in a whole heap of really important ways. And I think about autistic Twitter, which was such a big thing, such an important part of the international autistic community. And then it got bought by the worst autistic person on earth, and now it's a disaster, basically. And in many ways it was already actually kind of disastrous, but it was still works actually very effectively for connecting autistic people together in constructive ways, and and it worked in the same way for lots of other communities. But it was also in many ways always kind of awful, and that's important to recognize. So it feels like there are so many things that we could be doing better as a society. Neurodivergent people in particular, yeah, we can learn so much from each other. Everyone else can learn so much from us. And I kind of wish they would. Maybe they're starting to. I like to think that there are some signs of that happening.
Maybe me. My little thing is creating a small army of autistic children who understand their own identity and can advocate for it. Because actually, I don't understand why we're diagnosing this generation of children if we are not telling them, if we are not relating them within their community and to their community, and giving them the knowledge that we have as their, oh God, I'm going to call myself an autistic elder. I aged very quickly there, audience. But yeah, I do think the power is in our community and in sharing and being monotropic enough to to think about and do the things without burning out. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here, Sonny and Fergus. And these conversations have been brilliant. It's been great, and I can't thank you enough. Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nick King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.